So for those of you who join us regularly, you'll already notice there's a change this week. So we've set this event up as a meeting rather than our usual webinar approach. It's very much been set up so that we can do some of that networking and meet other people. And there's a chance for that with breakouts at the end. But I'm delighted that we've got some great speakers to just, I guess, start our discussion today as much as anything. So really delighted to be running this event in conjunction with Scotland Can Be, and thank you, Elle, for joining us. I'll hand over to you to say a few words in a minute. And also delighted today that we're joined by Tom Warren from Collective Architecture. And I have to say, I was looking at your website in preparation for today's session, and there were some brilliant projects on there. One of my big interests is recycling, so I loved the recycling centre in Bute. I have to say there's a bias there for me.
Wow,
but
that's one of our oldest ones.
Yeah, it was fabulous. I just love the way that you got all of the, I guess, built in all the kind of recycled materials into the architecture and design. It was fabulous. And I'm also delighted to be joined by Sarah Morton from Matter of Focus. They're a certified B Corp, and I'm not going to tell you everything about what all of our speakers today do, or I'll ruin their presentations, but delighted Sarah's joining us. And then we're going to finish off our speaker inputs for today by hearing from Josiah. So really delighted that Josiah's joining us from First Impact, or First Port. Some of you will know, part of the First Port group. So really delighted that Josiah's joining us. And we're going to hear from all of them. Then we've got our usual kind of Q&A. I'm happy to bring people on. Obviously, you can unmute if you've got questions. And we're going to try and get into breakout sessions by 12:15, just so that we've got a good time, good 20 minutes at the end for people to meet other people on the session. Very much looking at this, I guess, in terms of it's been set up, as I said, with Scotland Can Be as a joint event. It's very much about collaboration and partnership. Shared values. We kind of, I guess we can only talk about shared values if we talk to each other, hence the networking bit today. And so really delighted. I'm going to hand over now to Elle, who's going to tell us a little bit about Scotland Can Be, and then we'll hand directly over to Tom, then Sarah, and then Josiah. So thank you all, and yeah, feel free to post in the chat as we go through as well. Thanks a lot.
Thanks so much, Naomi. And thanks to Social Enterprise Scotland for hosting, and to Sarah, Tom and Josiah for being with us and sharing their time today. I've got a few notes, just kind of bringing Scotland Can Be's perspective to this intro before we get started and hear from our businesses. When Duncan reached out from the Social Enterprise Scotland team to suggest we co-host another event, I was really delighted. Since we last convened on this theme of shared values, back at the end of 2018, Scotland Can Be's commitment to building relationships and culture around this work has only deepened. So this webinar really provides another opportunity to do that. The events of the last few years have only served to accelerate the movement towards impact-driven business underway in Scotland, but also around the world. There's increasing demand across the board for a redefinition of what economic success actually looks like that's fit for the 21st century. In Scotland, this is increasingly focused on building a well-being economy, an economy which delivers human and ecological well-being instead of just GDP growth for growth's sake. And as a fundamental part of this shift, we're seeing a real reinvention of the role of business within the economy and society, and that social enterprise and impact-driven businesses are in a position to take real leadership in this change. More and more, the power of purpose and true stakeholder accountability are becoming a competitive advantage rather than just a nice to have. We're seeing this demand for change from all angles, from consumers and employees to investors and policymakers. And when we consider the bigger issues like well-being of future generations, or tackling global complex challenges like social injustice or the climate crisis. At Scotland Can Be, we're increasingly seeing the conversation with businesses shifting from why should I care to how do we do this better? And this includes a whole spectrum of business support professionals who are undertaking our trainings at the moment to be able to provide better help for businesses that they support on their journey of understanding and improving their impact. So with all this in mind today, we summarise Scotland Can Be's mission as to build a nationwide culture of business as a force for good, as a catalyst for place-based systems change in Scotland. And they say that there are two conditions required for systems change to actually happen. Number one is the recognition that the current system is failing, which is what I'm alluding to. But number two is the existence of viable alternatives, which is really where the focus of the conversation is today. It's really vital that we have these tangible examples of viable alternatives and business models which serve people and planet and contribute towards building a wellbeing economy to look to for hope, inspiration and guidance. And our speakers have a real great spectrum of experience and viewpoints from these much needed real live viable alternatives. So I'm really looking forward to hearing from Sarah about being a female-owned certified B Corp and a member of Scotland's Zebra Unite chapter, and from Tom about being employee-owned at Collective Architecture and taking leadership towards increasing inclusivity both within the practice and the industry, and from Josiah, who's a familiar face, but is in a position to tell us both about certified B Corps, social enterprises and impact investment. So without further ado, I'm going to hand over to Tom, who's going to speak to us first from Collective Architecture.
Thank you, Ellie, for that great introduction, and also nice to meet you in person. I've spoken to a number of your colleagues from Scotland Can Be over the years because we are taking a very leisurely approach to becoming a B Corp. We're taking our time because we want to do it justice. So thank you for that. I'm going to share my screen. Okay. Okay, so welcome. I'm Tom Warren from Collective Architecture. We're a Scotland-based architecture practice, and as Ali said in the introduction, we're an employee-owned company. I'm actually one of our employee-elected trustees, and I'll talk more about what that means to us as I go on. A bit of a snapshot of when we could all be together in the past. This is some of us in our Glasgow studio. There's about 50 of us these days in the whole company. And we work in a number of different sectors. Quite often our clients are social enterprises. We do a lot of work in the third sector and for housing associations and councils, public sector organisations. Community or individual participation in our projects and co-design approaches have always been at the core of how we've done our work. These photos are a bit of an overview of some of the many hundreds of projects we've been involved with. Initially as Chris Stewart Architects and then Collective Architecture when we became fully employee-owned. I'm not going to dwell on any particular architectural project today. You can look at our website, which has a whole array of details of projects, but just an overview, some of the built and kind of on the books images of work for housing associations in Edinburgh and Glasgow, predominantly here. Some of the cultural projects, both built, like in the middle, Carlton Hill in Edinburgh, and temporary exhibitions and lighting work. Again, working very closely with the communities and often trying to use that to create a real sense of place, both either exterior or interior. Straightforwardly, community buildings themselves, buildings that are either community owned, developed by community development trusts, or providing public sector provision for community organisations to work from or rent right across Scotland here. And then lastly, conservation projects, so working with existing buildings, an important sustainable agenda, and fits into a circular economy for construction, which is a particular focus of mine. And then out with the kind of core client-led projects, many individuals in the practice have led on a number of different initiatives, both creative, cultural, and activism based in some cases around the built environment, around social agendas, and talks like this and in other places are an important part of our work. So in a nutshell, to give a bit of a background to where we are now and our journey to employee ownership. The company was established by one of our founders, Chris Stewart, back in 1997. That he had colleagues who worked with him and grew to 5 employees. And then discussions around what growth would look like and how we share the success and the responsibilities and intellectual benefits of our work ensued. This is before I joined in 2009, so this is kind of prior to my involvement. But the decision was made in those kind of mid-2000s to become formally employee-owned, to change our ownership model, and actually to change the company name from Chris Stewart Architects to Collective Architecture. And that came into being 14 years ago this week. So it's our birthday on the 1st of May. So we're 24 years since Chris set up the practice and 14 years since we became employee-owned. And then in the intervening periods, we've really grown. There was a big period of growth around 2012. And then significantly, we went, although we'd become employee-owned, we actually kind of went through a whole governance review. So we're a private limited company, but when we became employee-owned, all of the shareholding went to an employee benefit trust. But in 2018, we reviewed that structure and actually took on employee elected directors and trustees, and also an independent trustee latterly last year. And that's our current structure. All employees worked remotely last year and still are. And as we stand now, we're actually spread across 4 different studios, Glasgow and Edinburgh being our main, but we've also established a base in Dundee, and I'm in Dunoon in Argyll, actually sat in a half decorated new studio here. And there's 50 of us spread around Scotland. So this is how many there were back in 2004. This is on the Titan crane in Clydebank, one of our early projects there. And as I've outlined, the move to employee ownership was really about sharing intellectual and hopefully financial benefits in the ownership. It was important and still is to build a culture of fairness, opportunities, and the collective name came about at that point as a way of demonstrating publicly that sharing of all aspects of what we do. Unfortunately, at the time, going back to pre-2007, 2004, 2005, there wasn't a lot of industry awareness around employee ownership. We're very fortunate in Scotland now to have a lot more support around that sector, particularly from Cooperative Development Scotland, through Scottish Enterprise, and other organisations like Scotland for Employee Ownership, and nationally in the UK, the Employee Ownership Association, which we're members and very active and involved. So the company found its way into employee ownership as much through a process of elimination of looking at different models. We wanted to remain a limited company because of the protection that gave us and a professional status, but also there was tax issues, which employee ownership is a model which helps share that ownership. So this is a nice photo of Chris signing the official signing of the deed of trust, which is our kind of top corporate governance document, and that was everyone celebrating back in 2007. I'll not dwell in too much in the detail of this, but basically this just shows how that ownership moved from Chris as a sole owner, sole company owner, through to an employee benefit trust. Then at that time, some individual shareholdings, which now have all reverted back to the EBT. So the company is 100% owned by the employees through the trust model. So a lot of companies now, it's great to see, are becoming employee owned, and a good number in our own sector of architecture. A lot of these, however, are to do with succession as people retire, rather than a trade sale or a company folding, or a competitor buying a business and maybe splitting it up or moving away from its geographic base. Our motivation was slightly different because it was quite early on in the company's growth. We felt, or those at the time felt, it was recognizing that we're bigger than just the individuals involved. And importantly, to get the governance, as is the case with many third sector organisations, the governance for us is really, really important. Which I think the level of scrutiny and openness and discussion around it is pretty unusual, I think, in the private sector. Equality of sharing ideas and new voices, younger people as they come into the practice. After a year's employment, everyone is an equal owner and has an equal voice, should we need to take things to a vote or anything of that matter. We have a very strong set of principles that underlie everything that we do, both our work and how we work with our colleagues and other consultants and clients and communities. And these have been summed up into this document here, which we call the unity of opposites, which are really contrasting factors, both big and small, the balance between the individual and groups, the balance between making profit as a business. We need to employ all our staff with a responsibility to pay the bills, but also to pitch. We're very careful about the types of projects we take on and the types of organisations we work with. Unfortunately, they're not necessarily at the high fee end of the architectural world, and so that balance between being a private business and how we use our profits or how we reinvest is a constant kind of challenge. A rather complex diagram of our governance model, but the key thing is at the top there, the board of trustees, of which I'm one of the 6 employee elected trustees and our 7th being independent, really there to hold the company board to account in kind of hard terms. And then everyone else working in different groups and communication internally is really key. And just what that's meant to us in terms of some of the success, opening new studios in Edinburgh, very high staff retention, and the opportunities that this has brought us in terms of the scale of work, et cetera, and then winning AJ Architect of the Year in 2018 was in no small part due to our model and the way of working as much as the work itself. Just briefly, some photos of when we elected our new employee directors on the left, and then the trustees when we signed the new deed of trust the other year, and then not everyone, but those who could be there for the photo when we had a great award success in 2018. I'm going to stop sharing at that point. I think I'm slightly over time there. Apologies for the next speaker.
Thank you very much, Tom. And over to you, Sarah. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Tom. It was really interesting to hear, and I think that it'll be quite nice complement to what I'm going to say, which is a slightly different story, but I'm really interested in employee ownership as a model and something that we're really interested in exploring as we grow. We're a much younger company, established in 2017. Matter of focus, we're a B Corp, as Elle mentioned, and we basically our mission is to help public service organisations understand and track the difference that they make. And just to say a little bit about myself, my early career was in the voluntary sector, And in fact, I'm still a trustee of a voluntary sector organisation, and my training is in community education. And then I spent a lot of my career working at the university, but working in a research centre, quite a small research centre. It was a little bit more like working for a small organisation than being really sucked into the bureaucracy of a university, and very much working with organisations around how they use data and evidence. So when I established Matter of Focus with a colleague who was also from the university, a lot of the people there used to said, "Oh, you're so brave. Oh, you're crazy to like leave the security of university to establish a company." But here we are, surviving and thriving. So that's a little bit of the journey to establishing Matter of Focus. And I suppose, you know, coming from that public sector background, being a purpose-led company isn't really that much of a surprise. And it's interesting because we didn't set out, oh, we're going to be a purpose-led company. We set out really caring about the fact that organizations in the public sector really need to be able to track how they make a difference to people and communities. And, you know, if they do that, they can be more efficient, they can be more effective, they can use data better to actually improve outcomes for people. And also that, you know, the public and third sectors are really underserved with good tech. There's lots of technological innovations going on, but they tend not to be in those sectors, and they tend to instead get offered sort of slightly adapted versions of private sector software tools, or absolutely horrendous systems that people cry when they have to enter data into. So, you know, we cared about those. And also, I suppose we cared about, I'm particularly passionate about, you know, work is a big part of life. There's nothing wrong with a good job that has reasonable hours, that has good work-life balance. These things are all okay, acceptable. And when we live in such an exploitative culture of 0 hours contracts and gig economy, you know, it almost seems radical to say that, but that, you know, I think it's so important that we reclaim the idea of work as a good place. And in a way, we were a bit lucky that 2017 was a really good time to be starting a mission-led company. So we quite quickly realized that, okay, we're not just a traditional company. We're really not like these other companies. We're different. And we quite quickly, Scotland Can Be, were actually maybe just going a little bit before that. I can't remember exactly when, but anyway, we got into a conversation with them, went to some training on the B core assessment. Also, Zebras Unite is an international movement started off with tech companies saying, well, we can't keep building these tech products that are serving the few. We've got to start building tech products that serve the many, and we've got to have different models of company formation and selling and investment that are actually more ethical and responsible. And also, I've become a member of FutureX, which is another network of purpose-led businesses. So in a way, we just hit a zeitgeist. I think we're quite lucky, because even having hit that zeitgeist, there's still quite a few challenges about being a purpose-led company. So basically what we do is, you know, we set up the company because we had a way of working that we knew worked really well for organizations with a vision for social change who wanted to track and understand what difference they made, and particularly in the context of Scotland, where, you know, services and lots of interventions are commissioned on outcomes. Everyone's like, well, how do we show the things that we do lead to these outcomes? And we've been working with organizations using the approach that we still have. And we used to give them a spreadsheet to run it on, and they used to nearly always fail. So we're like, there must be a better way. So we built a software platform called OutNav, where people can pull disparate data into a coherent story. We offer consultancy and sort of group onboarding to help people get to a really good place with using that. And we hold webinars and training events to help people understand these problems better, because they're quite big sort of public sector, public service problems about how do we know we're making a difference? How do we use data and evidence effectively? How do we understand the outcomes that matter to us? And so I suppose the business model is, we're selling software subscriptions alongside the consultancy, and actually we've bootstrapped the software on the back of the consultancy. And I think one of the challenges of being in this space is that traditional investment doesn't really fit very well, that we've never really managed to find a way of investment that really we feel doesn't take away from our values or take away from the vision we have for our company. We have had quite a lot of business support, and we are also like developing new software approaches as well that kind of fit in with our mission. But we've basically, yeah, I'm trying to find a better term for bootstrapped, you know, which means completely funding yourself on your own revenue, because it sounds too painful to me. I think I'd like something a little bit more, an empowering word rather than pulling yourself up with bootstraps. So just in terms of kind of where we are now, so with Ailsa and I mean, I suppose we have this background of working in these sectors. You can tell by my face, I'm not a young entrepreneur, I'm an old entrepreneur. So, you know, we have a track record, we have good networks, and that's been a really important part of getting going. We've now got 10 people on our staff, actually just about to be 11 next month. And so we've built this kind of staff team. We spent a long time when we set up thinking about what structure should we be? Should we be a charity? Should we be a social enterprise? Should we be, you know, other models? We looked around, and in the end we decided to be a company because we felt that that was the most flexible. It gave us a lot of control, but that also means control to offer discounts or work pro bono or do whatever we felt was right across the sectors. And I think maybe having both come from university where certainly finance and structure is not at all flexible, being able to have that flexibility and be able to move really quickly and do, you know, especially as we set up and grew, was really important to us. We've had business support through the Business Gateway, Scottish Enterprise, some innovation grants, and we've had a COVID grant. That has also not been without its challenges, and I'm really delighted that Scotland Campaign are now training some of these business advisors, because nearly all the business advisors were people who thought that having a mission was a sort of nice to have, and that in a way we should just focus on the real world, which is being a profit-based company that exploits your employees. You know, not quite as harsh as that, but there was definitely quite a feeling of misfit between the way we wanted to be in as a company and what was on offer in terms of the support. And I think that, you know, we really, it's interesting because I think the world has changed a lot in the last year in terms of this agenda, hasn't it? Like, actually, if you look at what's happening with zebras and beacons have both massively increased, there's much more talk of the whole Build Back Better agenda. So that is shifting, but I think still, if you set up a company tomorrow, most of the advice you get would be pretty traditional, and you would have to do the same thing of kind of finding your tribe by asking around. And it's not like someone would sit down and say, okay, what sort of company do you want to be? Would you like to be a mission-led company, or a, you know, what's important to you? That's not really how it goes. I suppose being purpose-led is really part of our DNA, and that maybe doesn't surprise you from what I've said about coming from this particular background and really caring about these issues. Like, it never felt like it was something we were adding on. It certainly isn't a shiny front. It certainly isn't a sort of corporate social responsibility strategy. It's actually something that runs through everything we do. So in terms of sales, we only sell to people we think can benefit. We don't sell to people we think won't benefit. And it's interesting because, you know, for a lot of sales strategies, that would kind of seem crazy. But of course, in our sector, there's such a big network effect. It is not in our interest anyway. It doesn't make any business sense to sell to people who aren't going to benefit. And actually, it's probably true of most companies. When we're recruiting, we're really thinking about how people fit with our values, what it means to embed them in day-to-day work. When we're thinking about growth, we're thinking about our purpose very much and where we want to be and what our vision for the future is. When we're thinking about staff development, it's very much around enabling people to do the best job they can and achieve their career goals and be the people they want to be. And when we're thinking about client support, it's very much about, you know, we hold all of our clients with unconditional positive regard. We know on the whole, you know, public servants and people in third sector organisations are really trying to do a difficult job with not many resources, and we are behind them. You know, even the most pernickety data person, we are completely trying to empower them and give them the tools that they can do their job with. So, I mean, we definitely see ourselves as part of this group of companies trying to really build a groundswell around why it makes sense to do this work. But I suppose I think there are a lot of challenges, and I just wanted to finish on this slide. So I think, you know, the system is still geared for for-profit business, and it's going to take quite a while to steer that juggernaut anywhere else. You know, it's a massive system with many, many layers, and I suppose there's you know, you need different business support. We need some different roadmaps. I don't even think we have these roadmaps. So interesting from what Tom was saying, you know, we would really like to have a goal of being an employee-owned company. There is no roadmap for that. It's not like someone, he could probably tell you, has told me a little bit about what that roadmap looks like, but it's not publicly available. Oh yes, this is the route from being a traditional company to that, from being a social enterprise or any other form. The advice you need is really different, because you don't want people who are just, you know, most of the people in the system who have a lot of experience have got experience of traditional business, and that's always going to be the thing that they feel comfortable with, and they're going to have to really step out of that. So we haven't got a whole cohort of people who've done this before who can help bring on the next generation. So I suppose meetings like this are really important. And so I suppose we just haven't really got that infrastructure to kind of move the system on. And I think that quite a lot of people don't believe in it as a model. They think, oh no, business is never going to be like that, or, you know, they're not really championing it as a way of working. It's a bit of a sort of fringe. I think we're still very much on the fringe. So I think a bit of convincing around that, and particularly ideally what we need is some big businesses to move in this direction. On the whole, they don't. And then the other thing that I find quite frustrating is a lot of the traditional business milestones that get celebrated and businesses that get held up are very much based on profit and investment. And so, you know, the ones that are in the papers are the ones that got a multi-million-pound investment. And if you talk to some of those business owners, they often say it was the most miserable time of their lives when they got these big investments, that actually it was chaos internally. It was really difficult. They were being pushed in directions they didn't want to, but that's still what we hold up as success. Oh, look, how many businesses in Scotland have got this money? And I know from a Scotland-wide point of view, you know, one of the goals is to bring investment to Scotland. So you can see why it happens like that. But I just feel like we haven't got ways of really highlighting these alternative models, and maybe they're beginning to happen a little bit, but they're not really out there yet. So I'm really interested in how we bring those along, and that's all I wanted to say. So I'll stop sharing and hand over to Josiah.
Thank you, Sarah, and thanks everyone. Apologies, I have a cold, so if I sneeze or sniffle when I'm speaking like that, I apologize for that. So I'm trying to kind of bring a little bit of the perspective that we have across Firstport and our other companies, which has kind of grown into occupying this space in kind of on both sides of the camp, both kind of with social enterprises and the history of that, but also what happens outside of that space alongside it. And I think for me, the ultimate aim that all of us in this room, virtual room, are kind of working for is trying to build this country and economy that puts people, communities, and the environment at its heart, and that all businesses, regardless of what structure you are, have some sort of impact on those things. In a lot of cases, it's bad impact, and hopefully in our cases, it's good impact. But there is impact everywhere. It's just kind of figuring out whether it's good or bad, or that you're doing more good than bad. And kind of when it comes to, you know, what model people have, and I think some of the questions that both Tom and Sarah were kind of placing out there, my personal view is that form should always follow function. Too often we have companies coming through Firstport and First Impact, and, you know, we see between 1,000 and 1,500 companies a year coming through our different programs. Is that they end up starting at the wrong place. We find a lot that start at the wrong place. We find private companies that down the road realize, hey, I should have been a social enterprise, or I'm acting like a social enterprise, I need to evolve, and vice versa. Some that start down the social enterprise route but realize, hey, I should actually be a sole trader, or I should be a tech company or whatever. And my motto is always, you should try to figure out what you're trying to solve in the world, figure out the most effective way of doing that, and then choose a legal structure or a model or something after that. And that could be a charity, it could be a social enterprise, could be a co-op, could be whatever. But, you know, you figure out what you're trying to solve and then find the best way of doing that. Looking at Firstport's data, and this is kind of getting into why and how we set up First Impact as our sister company. You know, in 2018, we did a deep dive on all the companies that had come through Firstport since its inception, 10 years before that. And what we found was that roughly 30% of those companies who set out on that social enterprise journey discovered at some point that the social enterprise model didn't work for what they were trying to do. And there were, sole traders in rural communities who just didn't have the people around them to set up an entity. There were tech companies, when it's a technology, but the R&D cost of setting it up was so high that they couldn't raise that capital through grants or all the early stage social enterprise stuff. There were, to be honest, a variety of reasons. And in looking at 2017 alone, that was 300 companies who did not have a place to go. And we found that we ended up playing this tag with places like the Business Gateway and Scottish Enterprise to some extent, where we'd send them there to get support. They'd come back because they were a purpose, and they'd kind of get lost in the cycle. And we couldn't find anywhere they went. So fast forward to 2 years ago, we really wanted to tackle that area because we were already working with all these companies and saw that they had the passion and vision of a social entrepreneur and needed a place and needed to find that support. Sarah was talking about the difficulty of getting the existing infrastructure to help understand what purpose and business means together. And so we set up First Impact as a social enterprise and also as a B Corp, as a certified B Corp, because those things are not mutually exclusive. We set that up really to understand and support that space. When we've been in this space for the past 2 years, in supporting things like Scotland Can Be and other programs, I often spend time asking people, why did you choose that model? Go to a private company, ask that question, go to co-op, ask that question, go to social enterprise. And often there still is a lot of dialogue around, I've chosen it because I don't want to be that other thing. So private companies not wanting to be a charity, not wanting to be a social enterprise, social enterprises not wanting to be a private company, not wanting to be a co-op, not wanting to be a charity, and charities as well do the same thing. And I think what kind of come back to that first point, it's not always the case that we choose things because we define ourselves against others, although there is the questions around shareholder primacy to some extent. But we should be working towards choosing the best model that helps us achieve that well-being economy in Scotland. Beginning to kind of look out into the future and what we're seeing, I spend a lot of time both in Scotland and probably less so internationally as I have been pre-COVID, but looking at where examples are where they're starting to see changes. And I kind of three key examples on the kind of purpose-led business space beyond social enterprise is kind of looking at the B Corp movement and what happens with the Body Shop. So people in the UK know the Body Shop. Historically, one of the worst companies, has been treated very badly, had so many boycotts against it. But in 2019, Elle and I were in Amsterdam together at a kind of B Corp gathering. And what was announced there was the sale of Body Shop to a B Corp called Natra, a cosmetics company. But what was really, really interesting about that sale was the only way that L'Oreal was able to sell Body Shop was if Body Shop itself became a B Corp and went through all the process to right all those bad things Body Shop did as a thing. So we had this big conglomerate that would only buy a company if it fixed all of those social and environmental things that happened part of it. I feel like that's a huge change if we start seeing companies do that, and to some extent Unilever's starting down that path, although it's not as far on as others. In addition to that, at the same event, there was this moment where the Unicenter and the European B Corp movement made a statement in a workshop that we have to build a movement of movements, that the only way we solve these big global challenges is we join forces together and realize that we're brothers and sisters of a movement to create a more well-being economy, and that there's an important role for everything that's there. And then more recently here in the UK with the B Lab community in the UK starting the Better Business Act campaign. So what we're doing in the UK across the B Corp movement, and this is everything from small social enterprise B Corps like First Impact and Matter Focus all the way up to The Guardian and some of the big ones, is to really start challenging the UK government and legislation around what a business is, to take that shareholder primacy where shareholders alone are the thing that we're working for, and try to build in community and employees and the environment, what we're doing, and actually change the legislation about what a company is and what its purpose is. There's a lot of work. Scotland's probably a little bit ahead of the rest of the UK on some of these things, because we built some of these into our kind of secondary legislation. But that movement, that there's businesses of all sizes, of all shapes, of all legal structures, of all communities trying to tackle what the UK sees as the purpose of a business. And the only way we're really going to change the tide of this country and this economy is to join across the spectrum of business for good, of purpose-led communities, to join together and push business, whatever model, to that place where the well-being of people, communities, and the environment is at the center of what we do. And I think we're getting there. I'm a slightly more hopeful than I think Sarah is. Sarah's very hopeful, but I think this is a good place and a good forum for us to begin to interact. And I think there are things that social enterprises have done historically over the past 20 or 30 years that can be taught to businesses outside of that space, and vice versa, things that some of the private companies are doing, particularly around governance and impact measurement, that can be passed back to the social enterprise community. But I'll leave it there, because I think there's going to be quite interesting chat following this.
Thank you, Josiah. I think there will be. I mean, we certainly know, particularly within just the social enterprise sector, legal structures is always quite the debate. And I know that there'll be a few comments, I'm sure, and thoughts and perspectives on that. And I guess, Sarah, your talk touched on it as well, in terms of, how do you define that right legal structure? And we can get hung up on all of this. I always think we should focus on impact is the core thing that brings us together. But it is important, I think, particularly in terms of, I guess, how we raise finance, looking at particularly grants in terms of how they're distributed and how that's thought. So I'm sure there'll be perspectives on that. Really happy to bring any people in who want to ask